Hi, my name's Cole Freeman. At my wedding reception 3 years ago, my older brother stood up during the toasts, looked straight at me with that smug grin he'd perfected over the years, and said, "Cole's always been a dreamer, never a doer. Let's toast to him finally settling down since his career never will." The room went silent. My bride squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled through it, but something inside me cracked that night. Fast forward to last month, and my brother lost his executive position at TitanCorp, the same company where he'd spent 15 years climbing the ladder, the same place that had rejected my application twice. But here's the twist he never saw coming. I'm the one who bought the company. Not for revenge, but because I'd built something he couldn't even comprehend. And when his severance check arrived with my signature at the bottom, everything changed. Let me show you how silence and strategy can rewrite your entire story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The reception hall was decorated exactly how Abigail wanted it. String lights draped across exposed wooden beams, soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, and tables covered in ivory linen with small mason jars filled with wildflowers. It was intimate, elegant, and perfect. About 60 people filled the space. Friends from college, Abigail's family, a few co-workers from the tech startup where I'd been grinding for the past 2 years, and of course, my family. My brother sat 3 tables away from the head table, nursing his third bourbon of the evening. He looked exactly like he always did at family events, tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks catching the light, hair slicked back like he'd just walked out of a corporate boardroom. Which, to be fair, he basically had. He'd taken the day off from his VP role at TitanCorp to attend, and he made sure everyone knew it. I'd heard him mention it at least 4 times during cocktail hour, casually weaving it into conversations like breadcrumbs of superiority. The toasts started after dinner. Abigail's maid of honor went first, telling a story about how we met at a coffee shop when I spilled an entire latte on her laptop. The room laughed. Her father stood next, voice shaking slightly as he welcomed me into their family, saying he'd never seen his daughter happier. I felt Abigail's hand tighten around mine under the table, and for a moment, everything felt right. Then my brother stood up. He didn't wait to be called. He just rose from his seat, glass in hand, and the room quieted. My mother looked over at him with this proud, expectant smile. My father nodded approvingly like he knew whatever was coming would be worth hearing. I should have known better. "I want to say a few words about my little brother," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. He had this way of speaking that made everything sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. "Cole's always been the dreamer in our family, the one with big ideas and even bigger plans." He paused for effect, letting the room settle into his rhythm. "But let's be honest, dreams don't pay the bills. I've watched him jump from job to job, project to project, always chasing the next big thing that never quite pans out." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my face neutral. Abigail's hand was now gripping mine so hard I could feel her nails digging in. "So tonight," he continued, raising his glass higher, "let's toast to Cole finally settling down, because if his career never will, at least his personal life has." He smiled that practiced smile, the kind that looked warm from a distance, but held nothing behind the eyes. "To Cole and Abigail." The room echoed the toast half-heartedly. Glasses clinked, people drank, and then conversation resumed like nothing had happened. But something had happened. In front of 60 people, on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, my brother had publicly branded me a failure, and my parents had smiled through it. I didn't stand up, I didn't make a scene. I just sat there, hand still locked with Abigail's, staring at the half-empty plate in front of me. The rest of the reception blurred together. People came up to congratulate us. I smiled. I thanked them. I posed for photos. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Later that night, back in our hotel room, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed still in her wedding dress, makeup smudged from happy tears earlier that had now mixed with frustration. "I can't believe he did that," she said quietly. I loosened my tie and sat down beside her. "I can." She looked at me, really looked at me. "This isn't the first time, is it?" I shook my head. It wasn't. This was just the loudest, most public version of something that had been happening my entire life. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every phone call, there was always some comment, some dig, some reminder that I wasn't measuring up to the family standard. My brother had set the bar, graduated top of his class, landed a corporate job right out of college, climbed the ladder with ruthless efficiency. And I'd taken risks, started projects, failed at a few, learned, tried again. But to them, trying was the same as failing. The next morning, we left for our honeymoon, a small cabin in the mountains, nothing extravagant. We'd saved what we could, but money was tight. I was still paying off student loans, still reinvesting every spare dollar into a side project I'd been building quietly for the past 18 months. A software platform that helped mid-sized companies streamline their internal operations. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't flashy, but it worked, and a handful of small businesses were already using it. I didn't tell my family about it. Why would I? Every time I'd mentioned a project before, I got the same response. Polite nods. Hollow encouragement. Or, worse, my brother's condescending advice about getting a real job. On the third day of our honeymoon, I got an email. The subject line read, "Acquisition Interest." I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something made me open it. It was from a venture capital firm based in Seattle. They'd come across my platform through a mutual connection and wanted to discuss potential investment or partnership opportunities. I read the email 3 times. Then I showed it to Abigail. She stared at the screen, then at me. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. Part of me wanted to. But another part, the part that had been beaten down by years of dismissal, wondered if it was even worth it. What if it led nowhere? What if it was just another dead end? Abigail took the laptop from my hands, hit reply, and started typing. "You're responding," she said firmly, "and you're taking the call." 2 weeks later, I was on a video conference with 3 partners from the firm. They asked questions, I answered. They wanted to see user data, retention rates, growth projections. I had all of it. I'd been meticulous, maybe because some part of me always knew I'd need to prove myself, not just to investors, but to everyone who'd ever doubted me. By the end of the call, they made an offer, not for investment, for acquisition. They wanted to buy the platform outright, integrate it into a larger suite of tools they were building, and they wanted me to stay on as a lead developer with equity in the parent company. The number they offered was more than I'd made in the past 3 years combined. I sat in stunned silence after the call ended. Abigail was at work. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I looked around at our small space, the second-hand furniture, the stack of bills on the counter, the life we'd been building with duct tape and determination. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe I wasn't the failure my brother thought I was. Maybe I'd just been playing a different game. One that required patience. One that didn't come with a clear ladder to climb, but instead required building your own. I didn't call my family. I didn't post about it online. I just accepted the offer, signed the paperwork, and got to work. The pattern didn't start at my wedding. It started long before that, so far back that I can't even pinpoint the exact moment I became the family disappointment. Maybe it was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right conditions to show itself fully. I grew up in a suburb outside of Portland, in a neighborhood where every house looked almost identical. Brick facades, 2-car garages, manicured lawns. My father worked in commercial real estate. My mother was a high school principal. They valued structure, achievement, results you could measure and display. My brother was 4 years older than me, and from the moment he could walk, he was everything they wanted. He won spelling bees. He captained the debate team. He got a full ride to a state university and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. By 25, he was a manager. By 30, a director. By 33, a vice president at TitanCorp, one of the largest logistics and supply chain companies in the Pacific Northwest. I was proud of him, at least at first. When I was younger, I looked up to him. I wanted to be like him. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned into comparison, and comparison turned into shame. I remember one particular night when I was 16. It was winter. raining like it always did in Portland. I'd just gotten my report card. Mostly B's, 1 C in chemistry, 1 A in art. I came home and set it on the kitchen counter where my parents could see it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father glanced at it, said nothing, and went back to reading the newspaper. My mother sighed, not loudly, but loud enough. "Cole, you're capable of more than this," she said. "Your brother never brought home grades like this." I wanted to say that I wasn't my brother, that I was trying. That chemistry made my brain feel like it was wading through mud. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and went upstairs. That same week, my brother came home for Thanksgiving break. He'd just been accepted into a prestigious internship program. My parents threw a dinner in his honor, invited aunts and uncles, made his favorite dishes. I sat at the end of the table, quiet, watching everyone celebrate someone else's success while my report card sat folded in my backpack like a dirty secret. The message was clear. Achievement was currency in our family, and I was bankrupt. By the time I got to college, I'd stopped trying to compete. I chose a different path. Studied computer science and design. Spent more time in makerspaces than lecture halls, building things with my hands and my mind. I liked solving problems. I liked creating tools that made people's lives easier. But that kind of work didn't come with trophies or Dean's List certificates. After graduation, I bounced around. I worked at a design agency for a year, hated the corporate bureaucracy, and left. I freelanced for a while, barely making rent. I joined a startup that folded after 8 months when the funding dried up. Each time I switched jobs or projects, I could feel my family's disappointment growing. At one family dinner, my father asked what I was doing for work. I told him I was consulting, helping small businesses with their digital infrastructure. "Consulting," he repeated, like the word tasted bad. "That's what people do when they can't hold down a real job." My brother laughed. My mother said nothing. I finished my meal in silence and left early. The worst part wasn't the insults. It was the invisibility. My brother's accomplishments were celebrated loudly and often. Promotions were announced at family gatherings. His name was mentioned with pride when my parents talked to their friends. But my work, my projects, my quiet progress, none of it mattered because none of it fit their definition of success. I started avoiding family events. Thanksgiving, I'd say I had to work. Christmas, I'd visit for a few hours and leave before dinner. My parents noticed but never asked why. Or maybe they did know, and just didn't care enough to change. When I met Abigail, things started to shift. She saw me differently. She asked about my work, not to judge, but because she was genuinely interested. She believed in what I was building, even when I didn't. She became the voice that countered all the others, the one that said I wasn't failing, I was just learning. But even her support couldn't erase years of conditioning. When my brother stood up at my wedding and said what he said, it wasn't shocking. It was just the loudest echo of something I'd been hearing my whole life. The day after we got back from our honeymoon, I drove past my parents' house. I didn't stop. I just slowed down as I passed, looking at the driveway where my brother's car used to be parked during visits. At the front door I used to walk through, hoping for approval I never received. I realized something in that moment. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove I belonged in that house, at that table, in that family. But maybe I didn't. Maybe I belonged somewhere else entirely. 3 months after the wedding, I was sitting in my home office, a converted corner of our bedroom, with a second-hand desk and a chair I'd found on the side of the road. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The acquisition had gone through. The money had hit my account. And for the first time in my adult life, I had breathing room. Abigail was at her nursing shift, working nights at the county hospital. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of my laptop fan. I was reviewing documents from the venture capital firm, employment contracts, equity agreements, non-compete clauses. Everything looked clean. Then I got a notification on my phone, LinkedIn. Someone had viewed my profile. I normally ignored these, but this one caught my eye. It was a recruiter from TitanCorp, the same company where my brother worked. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked through to their page and started browsing recent posts. That's when I saw it. A press release dated 2 weeks prior. TitanCorp had just lost a major contract with one of their oldest clients, a logistics deal worth tens of millions. The fallout was significant. The stock had dipped. And buried in the comments section of an industry news article covering the story, someone had mentioned that several executives were being, quote, free-structured. I sat back in my chair. Restructured. Corporate speak for fired. I opened a new tab and searched my brother's name. His LinkedIn profile was still active, still listed him as VP of Operations at TitanCorp. But there was something off. No recent posts. No updates. And when I checked the company directory on TitanCorp's website, his name wasn't listed anymore. My stomach tightened. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindication. I felt something closer to dread, like I just stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. I called a former coworker, someone who'd worked at TitanCorp briefly before moving to another firm. We'd stayed in touch, mostly through occasional messages about industry trends. "Hey, random question," I said when he picked up. "Do you still have contacts at TitanCorp?" "A few," he said. "Why?" "I heard they had some layoffs recently, just curious how bad it was." There was a pause. "Pretty bad. They cut about 15% of their leadership team. A lot of VPs got axed. Why? You thinking of applying?" "No," I said quickly. "Just heard some things. Thanks." I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. My brother had been let go, the golden child. The one who'd done everything right, followed every rule, climbed every rung, and now he was out. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't call my parents. I just sat there, processing. Part of me wondered if they even knew yet, or if he was hiding it, trying to figure out his next move before the family found out their star player had been benched. A week later, I got another email. This one was from the venture capital firm, but the tone was different, more formal. The subject line read, "Expansion Opportunity." Inside, they laid out a proposal. The parent company was looking to acquire a larger operation, something established with infrastructure already in place. They wanted to move into logistics and supply chain management, and they were considering TitanCorp as a target. The company was vulnerable after the contract loss. Stock prices were down, investors were nervous, it was the perfect time to make a move. And they wanted my input. As someone with equity in the parent company and a proven track record of understanding operational systems, they valued my perspective. I read the email twice. Then I looked up TitanCorp's financials. Public records showed declining revenue over the past 2 quarters. Leadership turnover. Restructuring costs. They were wounded, trying to stop the bleeding before it became fatal. I thought about my brother, about the wedding toast, about every family dinner where I'd been dismissed, about every time I'd been told I wasn't enough. And then I thought about something else. This wasn't about revenge. This was about opportunity. TitanCorp was a struggling company that needed new direction. I had the resources, the backing, and the knowledge to help turn it around. Not because I wanted to hurt my brother, but because I'd spent years learning how to fix broken systems. I replied to the email. I told them I was interested. I asked for more details. Over the next 3 weeks, I was pulled into meetings, conference calls, strategy sessions. The firm was serious. They had the capital. They had the legal team. All they needed was the right moment and the right leadership to pull the trigger. I didn't tell Abigail everything at first. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell your wife that you might be buying the company that just fired your brother? How do you make that sound like anything other than revenge? But one night, she asked me directly. "You've been distracted," she said. We were sitting on the couch, her feet in my lap, a blanket pulled over both of us. "What's going on?" I exhaled slowly. Then I told her everything. The acquisition talks. TitanCorp. My brother. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to do this because it's a good business move?" she asked, "or because it'll hurt him?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. "Both," I admitted, "but mostly the first one." She nodded slowly. "Then do it, but don't lose yourself in the process." That was all I needed to hear. 2 days later, I signed the preliminary agreements. The acquisition process would take months, maybe longer. But the wheels were in motion. And my brother had no idea what was coming. The acquisition process moved slower than I expected. Legal reviews, financial audits, board approvals, everything required layers of scrutiny and patience. Months passed. Winter turned to spring. Abigail and I moved into a slightly bigger apartment. Nothing extravagant, but it had a second bedroom I could use as a proper office. During those months, I changed. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could see from the outside, but internally something fundamental shifted. I stopped looking for validation from my family. I stopped waiting for my father to acknowledge my work or my mother to say she was proud. I stopped hoping my brother would see me as an equal. Instead, I focused on building. The parent company gave me more responsibilities. I was leading a team now, managing developers, overseeing product integration. The work was challenging, sometimes overwhelming, but it felt right. I was creating something that mattered, something that helped real businesses solve real problems. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make coffee, sit at my desk while the city was still dark, and work on strategies for the TitanCorp acquisition. I studied their operational structure, identified inefficiencies, mapped out where improvements could be made. This wasn't about destroying the company. It was about understanding it so completely that I could rebuild it better. Abigail noticed the change. One Saturday morning, she came into my office with 2 mugs of tea and sat down in the chair across from my desk. "You're different," she said, not accusatory, just observational. "Different how?" I asked, looking up from my laptop. "Calmer," she said, "more focused, like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." I thought about that. She was right. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of my family's disappointment, letting it shape how I saw myself. But somewhere along the way, I'd set it down, not because they'd changed, but because I had. "I think I finally stopped trying to prove something to people who were never going to believe in me anyway," I said. She smiled softly. "Good. They don't deserve that power over you." The only contact I had with my family during those months was through my mother. She'd call occasionally, always on Sunday afternoons, always with the same tone of polite distance. She'd ask how Abigail and I were doing, mention something about the weather, then casually drop updates about my brother. "He's taking some time to consult," she said during one call. "Exploring opportunities. You know how it is in corporate, sometimes you need a change of pace." I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her I knew he'd been fired. I just said, "That's good. I hope he finds what he's looking for." There was a pause on the other end. I think she expected me to ask more questions, to show interest, to fall back into the old pattern of elevating my brother's story above my own. "And how's your work going?" she asked, almost as an afterthought. "It's going well," I said. "Really well, actually." "That's nice, dear," she replied, her tone suggesting she wasn't really listening. "Well, I should let you go. Your father and I are heading to dinner." After she hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand, staring at the blank screen. There was a time when that conversation would have gutted me. The dismissiveness, the lack of curiosity about my life, the way she spoke about my brother with such careful optimism while barely registering my existence. But now, it just felt empty, like listening to someone speak a language I no longer understood. I got up, walked to the kitchen where Abigail was preparing lunch, and wrapped my arms around her from behind. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" she asked, leaning back into me. "For seeing me when no one else did." She turned around, cupped my face in her hands, and looked at me with those steady eyes that had never once doubted me. "You were always worth seeing, Cole. Some people are just too blind to notice." That night I couldn't sleep, not because I was anxious, but because my mind was racing with clarity. I got out of bed carefully so I wouldn't wake Abigail, went to my office, and opened a blank document. I started writing. Not a business plan, not a strategy memo, but something more personal. I wrote about what I'd learned over the past few years. About failure and resilience. About the difference between proving yourself to others and proving yourself to yourself. About how the people who dismiss you often do so because your success threatens their narrative. I wrote until my fingers ached and the sky outside started to lighten. When I finally stopped, I had pages of thoughts, raw and unfiltered. I didn't know what I'd do with them. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But getting them out felt like lancing a wound that had been festering for too long. By the time Abigail woke up, I was back in bed, staring at the ceiling. "You okay?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I'm better than okay." The next major development came in late June. I got a call from the lead partner at the venture capital firm. The acquisition had been approved. All the paperwork was finalized. TitanCorp was now under new ownership, and I was being offered a position on the executive board with significant decision-making authority. "We want you to help lead the restructuring," he said. "You understand systems, you understand people, and frankly, you have a personal investment in seeing this company succeed." He didn't know how right he was. The official announcement would go public in 2 weeks. Until then, everything was confidential. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone outside of Abigail, and even then, I was advised to keep details minimal. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. This was real. It was happening. In 2 weeks, my brother would find out that the company he'd spent 15 years building his identity around now belonged, in part, to me. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something quieter, something closer to peace. That evening, I took Abigail to a small restaurant downtown, the kind with dim lighting and handwritten menus. We ordered wine, shared a pasta dish, and talked about everything except work. We talked about the trip we wanted to take next year, about the dog we were thinking of adopting, about mundane, beautiful things that made life feel full. As we walked home, hand in hand under the glow of streetlights, she squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever happens next, we're going to be okay." I stopped walking, turned to face her, and kissed her forehead. "I know," I said, "because I'm not doing this for them anymore. I'm doing it for us." And that was the truth. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving my family wrong. It was about building a life where my worth wasn't determined by their approval, where my success wasn't measured by their standards. I'd spent years in their shadow, believing I was too small to stand in the light. But shadows only exist when something blocks the sun, and I was done letting them block mine. The 2 weeks before the public announcement felt like holding my breath underwater. Everything was in motion, but nothing was visible yet. I went to work, attended meetings, reviewed documents, all while carrying the knowledge that everything was about to change. The venture capital firm assigned me a transition team, 3 people who specialized in corporate restructuring. We met in a conference room at their downtown office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. They laid out the plan in meticulous detail. TitanCorp's current leadership would be notified first, privately, 48 hours before the public announcement. The board would be restructured. Several executive positions would be eliminated. Others would be absorbed into new roles. The goal wasn't to gut the company, but to streamline it, cut the inefficiencies that had been bleeding resources for years. "We'll need you to be visible during the transition," one of the consultants said, a woman named Piper Stone with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. "Employees need to see leadership that understands the business. You have credibility in operations and systems. That matters." I nodded, taking notes. "What about the existing executives? How much pushback are we expecting?" "Some will leave voluntarily," she said. "Others will fight. That's normal. But the numbers don't lie. The company was failing under the old structure. Change is necessary." I thought about my brother. Where would he fall in all this? He wasn't part of the current leadership anymore. He'd been let go months ago. But his name was still tied to TitanCorp in industry circles. People knew him, respected him, or at least they used to. After the meeting, I stayed behind. Piper was packing up her laptop, and I caught her attention. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." "When you do these acquisitions, these restructures, how do you separate the personal from the professional?" She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding how honest to be. "You don't," she said finally. "Not completely. There's always something personal in business, especially when it involves people you know. The key is making sure the personal doesn't cloud your judgment. You can have history with someone and still make the right call." I appreciated her honesty. It was something I'd been wrestling with privately. This acquisition made sense on every level. TitanCorp needed new direction. The financials supported it. The market supported it. But I couldn't pretend there wasn't a personal dimension. My brother's voice at my wedding still echoed in my head, and I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't want him to see this, to know that the little brother he dismissed had built something he couldn't. Hosu. But Piper was right. I couldn't let that cloud the bigger picture. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about transformation. Over the next week, I prepared. I read everything I could about TitanCorp's history, their client relationships, their internal culture. I reached out quietly to a few people who'd worked there, asked questions, gathered insights. I wanted to understand not just the numbers, but the people. One evening, I got a message from an old colleague, someone I'd worked with briefly at the startup that folded years ago. His name was Parker Grant, and he'd gone on to work in supply chain consulting. "Heard through the grapevine you're involved in something big," his message read. "If you ever want to talk shop, let me know." I called him the next day. We met at a coffee shop near his office, one of those places that roasted their own beans and took their craft seriously. "So," he said, stirring his espresso, "TitanCorp, huh?" I didn't confirm or deny, just smiled slightly. He laughed. "Don't worry, I'm not fishing for details. I just think it's wild. That place has been a mess for years. Great reputation, but operationally, disaster. I consulted there briefly 2 years ago. The leadership was so siloed, departments didn't even talk to each other." "What would you do if you were running it?" I asked. He leaned back, thinking. "Honestly, tear down the silos, implement cross-functional teams, invest in better tech infrastructure, and get rid of the egos." Half the executives there were more concerned with protecting their territory than actually improving the business. I filed that away. It aligned with what I'd been seeing in the reports. TitanCorp wasn't failing because of lack of talent or resources. It was failing because of structure and culture. Before we parted ways, Parker looked at me seriously. "Whatever you're planning, Cole, just remember, people resist change even when it's good for them. You're going to face pushback. Stay steady." I nodded. "I will." The weekend before the announcement, Abigail and I drove out to the coast. We rented a small cabin overlooking the ocean, the kind of place with a stone fireplace and a porch where you could hear the waves crashing at night. We didn't talk about work. We didn't talk about my family. We just existed together, cooking simple meals, taking long walks on the beach, sitting in comfortable silence. On our last night there, we sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled like salt and wood smoke. "Are you nervous?" Abigail asked quietly. "A little," I admitted. "Not about the business part. I know I can do that. But the other part, the family part, I don't know how that's gonna go." She rested her head on my shoulder. "They're gonna be shocked. Maybe angry. But that's not your responsibility, Cole. You didn't do anything wrong. You built something. That's not a crime." "I know," I said, "but it's still going to hurt them, and I don't want to be the kind of person who takes pleasure in that." "You're not," she said firmly. "The fact that you're even worried about it proves that." I kissed the top of her head, and we sat there until the stars came out, tiny pinpricks of light against an endless sky. When we got back to the city Sunday night, I had a voicemail from my mother. I almost didn't listen to it, but something made me press play. "Cole, it's Mom. Just calling to check in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Your brother's doing well. He's got some consulting gigs lined up. Anyway, call me back when you get a chance." Her voice was light, casual, like everything was normal, like the world wasn't about to tilt on its axis. I didn't call back. Not yet. There would be time for that conversation soon enough. Instead, I went into my office, pulled up the final draft of the press release that would go out in 48 hours, and read it one more time. TitanCorp announces new ownership and strategic restructuring under Crestline Ventures. Leadership changes aim to modernize operations and restore growth. My name was listed in the third paragraph as part of the new advisory board. Small, professional, undeniable. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow, the notifications would go out to TitanCorp's existing leadership. The day after that, the world would know. And my brother would finally understand that the dreamer he'd dismissed had been building something real all along. The morning of the announcement, I woke up before my alarm. The apartment was still dark, the city outside barely stirring. Abigail was asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what was about to happen settle over me like a heavy blanket. By 7 in the morning, I was showered, dressed in a suit I'd bought specifically for this day, and sitting at my desk with a cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. My phone sat face up on the desk, silent. The press release would go live at 9. The private notifications to TitanCorp's leadership had gone out yesterday at 5 in the evening. By now they knew. By now the shockwaves were already moving through the building. At 8:30 my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later it rang again. Same number. This time I answered. Cole Freeman, I said, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause, then a voice I recognized immediately. My brother. What the hell did you do? His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath, coiled and ready to strike. Good morning to you too, I said calmly. Don't play games with me, he snapped. I just got a call from someone still at TitanCorp. They said the company was acquired. They said your name is on the new board. Tell me that's not true. I took a slow breath. It's true. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I could almost hear him trying to process it, trying to fit this information into the version of reality where I was still the failure, still the one chasing dreams that never materialized. You bought TitanCorp, he said slowly, like he was testing the words, seeing if they made sense when spoken aloud. Not personally, I clarified. I'm part of the acquisition team. The company I've been working with for the past year led the purchase. I'm on the advisory board. This is insane, he said, his voice rising. You don't know anything about logistics. You don't know anything about running a company like TitanCorp. This is going to be a disaster. Maybe, I said, or maybe it's exactly what the company needs. Fresh perspective, new systems, leadership that actually cares about making it work instead of protecting egos. Is that what you think I was doing? He shot back. Protecting my ego? I built my career there, Cole. 15 years. I gave everything to that company. And they let you go, I said quietly. Not because you weren't talented, but because the whole structure was broken. You were part of a system that didn't work. That's not a personal attack, that's just reality. You don't get to lecture me about reality, he said, his voice dropping to something colder, more dangerous. You've spent your entire life avoiding it. Jumping from job to job, project to project, never committing to anything real. And now you stumble into some tech deal and suddenly you think you're qualified to run a logistics empire. I don't think I'm qualified to run it alone, I said. That's why I have a team. People who know what they're doing. People who actually care about fixing what's broken instead of just maintaining the status quo. This is revenge, he said. This is you trying to get back at me for every time I told you the truth about yourself. I felt something flare in my chest, hot and sharp. But I didn't let it take over. I'd spent too long getting to this place. This calm, centered place where his words couldn't pull me under anymore. If that's what you need to believe, I said, then believe it. But the truth is, this has nothing to do with you. TitanCorp was failing. Someone was going to acquire it eventually, it just happened to be us. You're lying, he said. You did this to humiliate me. No, I said firmly. I did this because it was the right business decision. The fact that you worked there, the fact that you got fired, those are circumstances, not motivations. He laughed, bitter and sharp. You really expect me to believe that? You expect anyone to believe that? I don't expect anything from you, I said. I stopped expecting things from you a long time ago. There was another silence, and then he said something I didn't expect. Mom and Dad are going to hear about this. They're going to know what you did. I'm sure they will, I said, and I'm sure you'll frame it however you need to. But I'm done trying to control how this family sees me. You all made up your minds about me years ago. Nothing I do will change that. You're right about that, he said coldly. You'll always be the disappointment, Cole. No amount of money or titles will change who you are. I felt the words land, felt them try to dig in the way they used to. But they didn't stick. They just bounced off, powerless. I'm sorry you see it that way, I said. I really am. But I'm not living my life for your approval anymore. I'm not living it for anyone's approval but my own. You're going to regret this, he said, his voice hard as stone. Mark my words. Maybe, I said, but it'll be my regret, my choice, my life. And then I hung up. I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, heart pounding in my chest. Abigail appeared in the doorway, already dressed for her shift, her hair pulled back, her eyes concerned. That was him, wasn't it? She asked. I nodded. How do you feel? I thought about it, really thought about it. Free, I said. She crossed the room, kissed me gently, and said, good. Now go show them what you're made of. At 9 a.m, the press release went live. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing. Emails, texts, LinkedIn notifications. Colleagues congratulating me. Strangers asking questions. Industry contacts reaching out to reconnect. It was overwhelming, a flood of attention I'd never experienced before. But the message I was waiting for came at 9:45. My mother. Cole, I need you to call me immediately. Your brother just told me something that I'm sure can't be true. Please call. I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the Crestline Ventures office downtown, where the transition team was gathering. We had meetings scheduled all day, with TitanCorp's remaining leadership, conference calls with key clients, and a press briefing in the afternoon. When I walked into the building, Piper Stone was waiting in the lobby. "You ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. "Good, because this is going to be a long day." She wasn't wrong. The first meeting was with TitanCorp's interim CEO, a man named Gerald Brennan, who'd been brought in after the last round of cuts. He was in his late 50s, gray hair, sharp suit, and an expression that said he'd seen it all before. "Mr. Freeman," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting someone your age on the advisory board." "I get that a lot," I said evenly. "But I've read your background," he continued. "Impressive work on the systems integration side. If you can bring even half of that efficiency to TitanCorp, we'll be in good shape." "That's the plan," I said. We spent the next 2 hours going over operational details, departmental budgets, and restructuring timelines. Gerald was professional, detail-oriented, and refreshingly pragmatic. He didn't care about politics or territory. He cared about results. "We've been bleeding talent for the past year," he said. "Good people leaving because they don't see a future here. If this acquisition can stabilize things, give people a reason to stay, that's what matters." I respected that. It reminded me why I'd agreed to be part of this in the first place. Not to destroy, but to rebuild. The second meeting was more contentious. 3 former executives who'd survived the initial cuts, but were now being reassigned. They sat across the conference table with crossed arms and skeptical expressions. "We've built this company from the ground up," one of them said, a man named Richard Chen who'd been with TitanCorp for over 20 years. "And now we're supposed to take orders from someone who's never worked a day in logistics?" "You're not taking orders from me," I said calmly. "You're taking direction from a team that includes me, and yes, I don't have your experience in logistics. But I do have experience in identifying broken systems and fixing them. That's what I'm here to do." "Broken systems?" Another one, a woman named Valerie Kim, said sharply. "Is that what you think this is?" "I think TitanCorp lost a major contract, laid off 15% of its leadership, and saw its stock drop 20% in 6 months," I said, keeping my voice level. "I think those are symptoms of systems that aren't working, and I think everyone in this room knows it." That landed. The room went quiet. Richard looked away. Valerie's expression softened slightly. "We're not here to assign blame," Piper interjected smoothly. "We're here to move forward. And that's going to require everyone working together, including the people who know this company best. That's you." The rest of the meeting was tense, but productive. By the end, they weren't happy, but they were listening. That was enough for now. The press briefing that afternoon was held in a hotel conference room downtown. About 30 journalists showed up, a mix of industry reporters and local business media. I sat at a long table with Piper, Gerald, and 2 other members of the acquisition team. The questions came fast. What's the vision for TitanCorp? How will this affect employees? What changes are coming? I answered carefully, sticking to the talking points we'd prepared. We're focused on modernizing operations. We're committed to retaining talent. We're investing in technology and infrastructure. Then someone asked the question I knew was coming. "Mr. Freeman, there are reports that your brother was a former VP at TitanCorp. Can you comment on whether this acquisition has any personal dimension?" I took a breath. The room went silent, everyone leaning forward slightly. "My brother did work at TitanCorp," I said. "And yes, I'm aware of the optics. But this acquisition was driven entirely by business fundamentals. TitanCorp is a strong company with unrealized potential. That's why we invested. Personal relationships didn't factor into the decision." "But surely there's some awkwardness," the reporter pressed. "Family dynamics are always complicated," I said. "But this isn't about family. It's about building a sustainable, successful business." The reporter didn't look satisfied, but I didn't give him anything more. Piper moved the conversation forward, and the briefing ended 20 minutes later. As I walked out of the hotel, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "We need to talk. This is unacceptable." I stared at the message for a long moment, Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. I'd spent my entire life trying to meet their definition of acceptable. I was done. The fallout was immediate and messy. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from extended family. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunts and uncles I barely knew. Some were curious, asking careful questions about the acquisition. Others were accusatory, suggesting I'd betrayed the family, that I'd humiliated my brother on purpose. I didn't respond to most of them. There was nothing I could say that would change their minds. They'd already decided what this meant, and no explanation from me would shift that narrative. My mother called 6 times over 2 days. I finally answered on the 7th. "Cole, what have you done?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. That particular tone she'd perfected over the years. The one that made you feel small without her ever raising her voice. "I took a position on an advisory board for a company acquisition," I said calmly. "It's part of my job." "Don't be naive," she said sharply. "You knew your brother worked there. You knew what this would do to him." "He doesn't work there anymore, Mom. He was let go months before this acquisition even started." "That's not the point," she said. "The point is, you've made him look foolish. You've made this whole family look foolish. People are talking, Cole. Do you understand that? People in our community, people your father does business with, they're all asking questions." I felt that old familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to make me shrink, make me apologize, make me fold under the weight of their judgment. But this time it didn't take hold. "I'm sorry people are talking," I said, "but I didn't do anything wrong. I took an opportunity that made sense for my career. That's all." "This isn't about your career," she said, her voice trembling now. "This is about you trying to get back at your brother for every perceived slight you've ever felt. This is petty, Cole. It's beneath you." "Perceived?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Mom, he stood up at my wedding and told everyone I was a failure. In front of 60 people. On what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. That's not perceived. That happened." "He was joking," she said quickly. "You've always been too sensitive." And there it was. The same script we'd been running for decades. My feelings didn't matter. My hurt wasn't real. I was too sensitive, too emotional, too unable to take a joke. "I'm not doing this," I said quietly. "I'm not going to defend myself to you anymore. I've done nothing wrong. If you can't see that, that's not my problem." "Cole, don't you dare." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From release. From finally cutting the cord I'd been holding on to for too long. Abigail walked into the room, saw my face, and immediately came over. "Your mom?" she asked. I nodded. "How bad?" "About what I expected," I said. "She thinks I did this to hurt him. She thinks I'm being petty." Abigail sat down beside me, took my hand. "You know that's not true." "I do," I said, "but it doesn't make it easier." She squeezed my hand. "It's not supposed to be easy, but you're doing the right thing. You're finally choosing yourself." Over the next week, the narrative solidified. My brother was painting himself as the victim, the loyal employee who'd given his best years to a company only to be betrayed by his own flesh and blood. He gave an interview to a local business blog, carefully worded but dripping with implication. "It's unfortunate when family dynamics interfere with professional integrity," he said in the piece. "I only hope the people now running TitanCorp understand what they've taken on." The comments section lit up. Half the people sympathized with him. The other half saw through it, pointing out that he'd been let go long before the acquisition, that this was sour grapes dressed up as principal. I didn't respond publicly. Piper advised against it, and I agreed. Engaging would only feed the story. Better to let the work speak for itself. And the work was speaking. Within 2 weeks of the acquisition, we'd implemented the first wave of changes at TitanCorp. New project management software, cross-departmental collaboration initiatives, a restructured client relations team. The stock stabilized, then started to climb. Clients who'd been nervous about the transition started expressing confidence again. Gerald sent me an email after the first full month. "Whatever personal baggage you're carrying, leave it at the door. Because what you're doing here is working. Employees are responding. Clients are responding. Keep it up." I appreciated that. It was the kind of validation that actually meant something, not based on who I was related to or what my last name was, but on results. on work, on value I was actually creating. But the family wasn't done. My father reached out, not with a phone call, but with a formal letter delivered to my apartment. I found it in the mailbox one evening, thick envelope, my name written in his precise handwriting. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. Inside was 3 pages, typed, single-spaced, a manifesto of disappointment. He detailed every way I'd failed the family, every decision I'd made that reflected poorly on the Freeman name. He called the acquisition a, quote, vindictive power play. He said I'd chosen ambition over blood. He ended with a line that hit harder than I expected. You were given every opportunity to succeed within this family's framework. That you chose to reject it speaks more to your character than any business deal ever could. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be judged by people who never really knew me, who never wanted to. Abigail found me sitting at my desk an hour later, staring at nothing. What's wrong? She asked. My father sent a letter, I said. What did it say? I told her, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Do you want my honest opinion? She asked. Always. They're scared, she said. Your whole life, they've had you in a box. The disappointment, the one who didn't measure up. And that box made them feel better about themselves, made them feel secure in their own success. But now you've broken out of that box. And it terrifies them. Because if you're not the failure they said you were, then maybe their judgment was wrong. And people like your father don't handle being wrong very well. I let that sink in. She was right. This wasn't about me hurting them. This was about them losing control of the narrative they'd built around me. What do I do? I asked. Nothing, she said. You keep building your life. You keep doing good work, and you let them sit with their discomfort. It's not your job to make them feel better about the choices you've made. I pulled her close, rested my forehead against hers. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You were yourself, she said simply. That's all you ever had to be. The breaking point came 6 weeks after the acquisition. My brother showed up at the Crestline Ventures office unannounced. Security called up to let me know someone named Freeman was in the lobby asking to see me. I could have told them to send him away. Part of me wanted to. But another part, the part that still remembered when we were kids, when he taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies at school, that part said I owed him a conversation. I went down to the lobby. He was standing by the windows, hands in his pockets, staring out at the street. When he heard my footsteps, he turned. He looked different, older, tired. The polished veneer was gone, replaced with something more raw. Cole, he said. What are you doing here? I asked, not unkindly, just direct. I needed to see you, he said, face to face. I gestured toward a seating area in the corner, away from the main foot traffic. We sat down across from each other, the space between us feeling like a canyon. I'm not here to apologize, he said. I don't think I did anything wrong. Okay, I said. Then why are you here? He looked down at his hands. Because I need to understand why did you do it, and don't give me the business answer. I want the real answer. I thought about lying. About giving him the polished version, the one that sounded reasonable and detached. But I was tired of pretending. You want the real answer? I said. Fine, I did it because I could. Because for the first time in my life, I had the resources and the opportunity to do something significant, and I took it. Was there a part of me that felt good knowing it was TitanCorp? Yeah, there was. Because you spent 15 years there acting like you were untouchable. Like you'd figured out the secret to success and I never would. And then the company fell apart, under the same leadership you were part of. So yeah, there was some satisfaction in that. He flinched slightly but didn't interrupt. But that's not why I did it, I continued. I did it because TitanCorp needed help, and I knew I could be part of that help. I did it because it was the right move for my career, and I did it because I stopped letting your opinion of me dictate what I was capable of. You think I wanted you to fail? He asked, his voice strained. I think you needed me to, I said. Because as long as I was the screw-up, you got to be the golden child. You got to be the one mom and dad were proud of. You got to feel superior. And maybe you didn't do it consciously, but you built your identity on being better than me. So when I started succeeding, it threatened that. And you couldn't handle it." His jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might yell, but instead he just shook his head. "You really believe that?" he asked. "I do," I said. "And I think deep down you do too." He stood up abruptly. "This was a mistake." "Probably," I agreed, "but at least now we both know where we stand." He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, he stopped, looked back. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I didn't think you'd actually do anything with your life. I really believed that." "I know," I said. "That's the saddest part." And then he left. I watched him disappear into the street, swallowed by the crowd. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just a quiet, aching sadness for what could have been if we'd been different people. If we'd been raised in a different family, if things had gone another way. But they hadn't, and now we were here, and that was something I'd have to make peace with. 3 months after the acquisition became public, I found myself standing in front of a room full of TitanCorp employees. It was a town hall meeting, something we'd instituted as part of the new transparency initiative. The auditorium was packed, maybe 200 people, faces I was still learning, names I was still memorizing. Gerald stood beside me at the podium, along with Piper and 2 other members of the leadership team. The energy in the room was cautious but curious. These people had been through hell over the past year. Layoffs, restructuring, uncertainty about their future. They deserved honesty. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about why I'm here," I began, my voice carrying through the microphone. "About my connection to this company, about my motivations, so I want to address that directly." The room went completely silent. You could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. "Yes, my brother worked here. Yes, he was let go before this acquisition. And yes, I'm aware of how that looks," I said, meeting eyes around the room. "But I want to be very clear. I didn't come here to settle scores. I didn't come here to prove a point to my family. I came here because TitanCorp is a company worth saving, and I believed I could help do that." I paused, letting that land. Over the past 3 months, we've made significant changes. New systems, new processes, new leadership structures. And I know change is hard. I know some of you are tired. Some of you are skeptical. That's fair. But look at the results. Client retention is up 18%. Employee satisfaction scores have improved. We've brought back 12 people who were laid off last year. And our stock price is higher than it's been in 14 months. A few people nodded. I could see some of the tension starting to ease. We're not done. We have a long way to go. But we're moving in the right direction. And that's because of you, the people in this room who show up every day and do the work. My job isn't to be the hero of this story. My job is to remove the obstacles that have been preventing you from doing your best work. That's it. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then someone started clapping, then another person, then the whole room. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't a standing ovation, but it was real, it was earned. After the town hall, a woman approached me. She was probably in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mr. Freeman, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "I've worked here for 9 years. The last 2 were brutal. I was planning to leave, actually had interviews lined up, but things feel different now, like maybe there's a future here again." "What's your name?" I asked. "Julia Patterson. I'm in client services." "Julia, thank you for staying, and thank you for giving us a chance to prove we can make this work." She smiled, genuinely this time, and walked away. That conversation meant more to me than any press coverage or industry recognition ever could. That evening, I drove home in silence, windows down, cool air rushing through the car. When I walked into the apartment, Abigail was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the space. "How was the town hall?" she asked, not turning from the stove. "Good," I said, wrapping my arms around her from behind. "Really good, actually." "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," I said. "You know that, right?" She turned in my arms, looked up at me with those steady, unwavering eyes. "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." We ate dinner on the couch, some pasta dish she'd improvised, and watched a documentary about ocean life. Normal. Simple. Perfect. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with an email. The sender name made me pause. It was from a foundation I'd never heard of, something called the Brennan Family Education Fund. I opened it. Mr. Freeman, my name is Thomas Brennan. You don't know me, but my father is Gerald Brennan, the interim CEO at TitanCorp. He's spoken highly of your work there, and I wanted to reach out about a potential collaboration. Our foundation provides educational resources and mentorship to young people from underserved communities who are interested in technology and business. We're looking for partners who understand what it means to build something from the ground up, who faced obstacles and found ways through them. Based on what my father has told me about your background, I think you might be exactly the kind of person we're looking for. Would you be open to a conversation? I read the email 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Abigail with a simple message. What do you think? Her response came 2 minutes later. I think this is what you were meant to do. Over the next few weeks, I met with Thomas and his team. The foundation was small but impressive, focused on creating pathways for kids who didn't have the traditional advantages, who came from families that didn't understand technology or business, who were dismissed or overlooked because they didn't fit a certain mold. It felt personal in a way I hadn't expected. We're not looking for a figurehead, Thomas explained during one of our meetings. We're looking for someone who can mentor, who can share real experiences, who can show these kids that success doesn't have to look like what their parents or teachers told them it should look like. I'm interested, I said, very interested. We structured a partnership. I'd commit 10 hours a month to mentorship and speaking engagements. I'd help develop curriculum around entrepreneurship and systems thinking. And I'd provide seed funding for a new scholarship program focused on first-generation college students studying technology. The first event was held at a community center in a neighborhood I'd never spent time in. 40 kids, ages 15 to 18, sitting in folding chairs, some looking bored, some looking hopeful, all of them looking like they'd been told 1,000 times what they couldn't do. I stood in front of them without notes, without a polished presentation, and I just told them the truth. My family thought I was a failure, I began. For most of my life, I believed them. I thought success meant following a specific path, getting the right job, impressing the right people. But I kept failing at that. I kept getting fired or quitting or watching projects fall apart. And every time it happened, I felt like I was proving them right. A few kids leaned forward slightly. But here's what I eventually learned. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of success. Every time something didn't work, I learned something. About systems, about people, about myself. And eventually those lessons added up to something real, something valuable. I told them about the startup that folded. About the freelance work that barely paid rent. About building a software platform in my spare time while working another job. About the acquisition, not as a victory lap, but as a result of years of unglamorous, incremental work. You're going to be told you're not good enough, I said. You're going to be dismissed. People are going to doubt you, maybe even people in your own family. And that's going to hurt. But you get to decide what you do with that hurt. You can let it define you, or you can let it fuel you. After I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then a young woman in the front row raised her hand. Did it ever stop hurting? She asked. The stuff your family said? I thought about that, really thought about it. Sometimes it still does, I admitted, but it hurts less now. Because I'm not living for their approval anymore. I'm living for my own sense of purpose. And that makes all the difference. She nodded, like that answer meant something to her. Over the following months, my life found a rhythm. I continued my work with TitanCorp, watching the company stabilize and then grow. I expanded my involvement with the Brennan Foundation, meeting with students, reviewing scholarship applications, watching young people I'd mentored land internships and college acceptances. Abigail and I bought a small house. Nothing extravagant, but it had a yard, and a second bedroom we turned into a shared office. We adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Pepper, who had more energy than both of us combined. Life became full in a way that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. I didn't hear from my brother. My parents sent a Christmas card that year, the generic kind with a printed family photo and a pre-written message inside. My name was on the envelope, but there was no personal note. I sent one back, same energy, and left it at that. One afternoon in early spring, about a year after the acquisition, I was working from home when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Cole Freeman?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Hannah Clark. I'm a reporter with Pacific Business Journal. I'm working on a feature about second-generation entrepreneurs, people who've succeeded outside of family businesses or expectations. Your name came up in my research, and I'd love to talk to you about your story." I hesitated. I'd avoided most press since the initial acquisition coverage, but something about this felt different. "What would the angle be?" I asked. "Honestly, I want to talk about what it means to define success on your own terms, especially when the people who are supposed to support you don't. I think it's a story a lot of people need to hear." We scheduled an interview for the following week. When the article came out a month later, it was fair, thoughtful, and honest. It talked about the acquisition but focused more on the journey, the failures, the family dynamics, the choice to keep building even when it felt impossible. The week after it published, I got an email from someone I hadn't thought about in years. May, the young woman I'd met at the coffee shop, the one dealing with her own family betrayal over an inheritance. "I saw your article," she wrote. "I just wanted you to know that conversation we had that day, it stuck with me. You told me I wasn't invisible. I've thought about that a lot over the past year. I fought for what my grandmother left me. It was hard and messy, and I lost some family members in the process. But I won. And more importantly, I learned that I don't need their validation to know my worth. Thank you for that." I read her email 3 times, then wrote back. We stayed in touch after that. Occasional messages about life and work, and the complicated process of healing from family wounds. On a quiet Sunday morning in June, almost 2 years after my wedding, Abigail and I were sitting on our back porch drinking coffee and watching Pepper chase squirrels in the yard. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my brother, the first direct contact since that day at the Crestline office. I saw the article. "I don't agree with everything you said, but I understand it better now. That's all I wanted to say." I showed the text to Abigail. She read it, handed the phone back. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe, eventually, but not today." She nodded, understanding without needing explanation. I set the phone down and looked out at the yard, at the life we'd built, at the peace I'd fought so hard to find. My brother's text didn't change anything. It didn't erase the hurt or rewrite the past, but it was something, a small crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable. Maybe one day that crack would widen. Maybe we'd find some kind of relationship again, different from what it was, but real in its own way. Or maybe we wouldn't. Maybe this was as close as we'd ever get. And I was okay with that. Because I'd learned something crucial over the past few years. You can't control how people see you. You can't force them to acknowledge your worth. All you can do is build a life that reflects your values. Surround yourself with people who see you clearly, and trust that your work will speak louder than anyone's doubt ever could. That evening, I sat down at my desk and opened a blank document. I'd been thinking about writing something longer, not for publication, but for myself. A record of what I'd learned, what I'd survived, what I'd built. I titled it simply, "The Long Way Home." And I began to write. Not about revenge or vindication. Not about proving anyone wrong, but about the quiet, unglamorous work of becoming yourself when the world keeps telling you you're not enough. About the people who see you when others refuse to look. About the difference between being successful and being whole. I wrote for 2 hours, words flowing faster than they had in years. When I finally stopped, Abigail appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine. "You look peaceful," she said, handing me a glass. "I am," I said, and I meant it. We clinked glasses, and she settled into the chair across from me. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Something for me," I said, "maybe for others too, eventually, but mostly for me." "Good," she said, "you deserve to tell your own story." Later that night, lying in bed with Abigail asleep beside me and Pepper curled at our feet, I thought about my wedding day. About standing in that reception hall while my brother made me feel small in front of everyone I cared about. About how powerless I'd felt, how certain I was that his words were true. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was coming, what would I say? I'd tell him to hold on. I'd tell him the pain was real but temporary. I'd tell him that the people who dismiss you are often the ones most threatened by what you might become. I'd tell him that success isn't about making them see your worth, it's about seeing it yourself. But most of all, I tell him this: you don't need their approval to build a life worth living. You just need the courage to build it anyway. And that's exactly what I did. The company I helped save went on to become one of the most innovative logistics firms in the region. The foundation I partnered with expanded to 3 more cities, reaching hundreds of young people who needed someone to believe in them. And the life Abigail and I built together became the kind of quiet, steady happiness I'd stopped believing was possible. My brother and I never became close again, but we reached a kind of truce, a mutual understanding that we were better apart than together. My parents remained distant, polite but detached. And I made peace with that too. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all: you can't wait for other people to give you permission to succeed. You have to give it to yourself. And once you do, everything changes. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And that's a kind of victory no one can ever take away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.